Is it possible to master macro photography in just a weekend? Well, that's the challenge I've set myself this week, so why don't you join me and we'll see just how I get on. So armed with my camera, a quiet forest and a subject that's small enough to be overlooked, I want to see what happens when I stop chasing the big picture and start focusing on the smaller one. I've arrived at Kingswood shortly after sunrise. This place gets busy during the day with walkers, especially at this time of year when the bluebells are out like this. This woodland floor turns into a wash of purple and green, but it doesn't stay long. After a few weeks, it's gone. The light is soft, the sky is clear, and for once, there's barely any wind, and that's about as good as it gets for macro photography. The bluebells are just past their first bloom, still beautiful and delicate, and early mornings here are usually calmer, with less wind and more grace. These bluebells are going to be my subject for today. Somewhere for me to explore my lighting techniques, and ordinarily a subject that I would normally include in a much wider vista. I'll be trying out 3 different lighting techniques. I'm going to start by using just the natural light that's available in the woodlands. I'm going to trial using flash photography, and finally continuous lighting using LED lighting panels. I'll be using a technique today called focus bracketing. When using a macro lens, shooting at apertures of f11 or f16 can still result in images with a very, very small depth of field. If we try and stop down further than this, we start to introduce diffraction, and this can lead to softer images. So by using this technique, we can open our aperture up to say f4 and take a sequence of images that will start at the front of the subject and go all the way to the back. When taken into the computer and then finally stacked, this should give us an image that's sharp from front to back. Before we get started, let's quickly talk about the equipment I'll be using. I'll be shooting on a Fuji X-T5 paired with the XF 80mm lens, which is the equivalent of 120mm on a full frame sensor. It's got optical image stabilization and a 1:1 magnification, which will really allow us to pick out the details in our subjects today. So for my flash photography, I've got the AD100 Pro. What I like about this is it's lightweight, it's portable and pretty powerful. I'll be interested to see how we get on using the dome diffuser and whether it can keep up with the rapid rate at which we're going to fire off for the stacking. For my continuous lighting solution, I found this cheap panel on Amazon, and what I like about it is that I can adjust both the colour temperature and also its brightness. It'll be interesting to see how these two compare against each other in the field. For the focus bracketing, I'm going to keep things simple. I'm going to take a sequence of 50 images, and on my camera I'm going to use a step interval of 5. This seems to be a pretty good sweet spot, and shooting everything at f4 should maintain consistency when we compare the images afterwards. Well, that's the idea. 3 lighting techniques. Let's see how we get on. So it didn't take me long to find my first subject and frame up a composition. What I really like about this bluebell is that it stands out from the rest of them, and the composition allows for the beautiful purple colours and the greens of the woodland to come through in the background, but remain incredibly diffuse, thus not distracting from the subject itself. I've put the bluebell in this nice arc, and I've got the front bluebell perfectly sharp and in focus. So I've set up my camera for using the natural light. We've got a nice exposure here, and I'm going to go ahead and just check that looks nice and sharp, and let's just take a test image. Yes, and I'm happy with that. Punch in, yes, it is sharp. Perfect. So let's switch that over to bracketing, and let's go ahead and take our 50 images. So you can see there is little to no wind movement, and that is just going through and taking all 50 images, and I think they're going to stack very well indeed. Let's now switch over to using the flash, and to do this I'm just going to go in and change my shutter type to mechanical. And the first thing I want to do is I want to underexpose the background by about 1 stop. So I'm going to go ahead and take a test shot. Let's put that over onto single. I've got this on its lowest power setting, and I think that's going to be more than enough, but we'll have a test fire. And let's just punch in. Yeah, and we can see that that's beautifully illuminated without being overexposed. So I'm very happy with that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch that over onto bracketing. And I'm going to go ahead and take all 50 images. and the flash was able to keep up with the shutter speed. So I'm hoping that, again, that's going to stack together really nicely. So for my final lighting setup, I'm going to leave the settings exactly as they are. I've got the background underexposed by 1 stop. Everything should be exactly as it was, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the continuous lighting. And the benefit of this lighting panel is that I've got it set to 5500 Kelvin, which is daylight. I've got it on full power, but I can move the light in and out to see what the subject's going to look like, and I think that's going to work brilliantly. So the first thing I'm going to do is just go in and change my shutter type back to electronic, and I'm going to see how that looks. Yeah, and already, as I move this around, I can really see how it shapes the light. So I'm going to take a test shot and then punch in and see how that looks. Yeah, the lighting is lovely. Again, very, very nice way of being able to diffuse and separate out the background. I'm happy with that. So I'm going to switch that over onto bracketing. Again, just find where I want the light. That looks good. And go ahead and take all 50 images. The bluebell staying perfectly still. And that's captured that sequence perfectly. So that's it for my field test. 3 lighting setups, 1 flower, and a few rare moments of stillness. I'm back in the office now, and I've had a chance to go through all of the images from the field. Before we look at the results, here's a quick overview of my technical workflow. This isn't a full tutorial, but enough to understand how the stacks were processed. First, I group each of the 50 bracketed images into stacks in Lightroom. It keeps the library clean and manageable. From there, I move one set at a time into a working folder. The only preset I'm using is the Fuji Astia profile. I like how it looks, but it needs to be applied to the raw file before exporting as a TIFF. I've created a dedicated export preset that sends the stack to a separate folder ready for external stacking. I ruled out using Photoshop. It was resource heavy, slow, and didn't handle the stacks particularly well. Helicon Focus was another option I looked at, but unfortunately it crashed repeatedly on my M4 MacBook. So I settled on an application called Zerene Stacker. You can find in-depth tutorials for all of these applications on YouTube. In Zerene, I add the exported files and run both stacking methods, PMax, which emphasizes texture and detail, and DMAP, which gives a smoother transition. I run both and compare. Once complete, I export the final images and bring them back into Lightroom. The natural light version is soft and atmospheric. There's a realism to it that's very appealing. The flash version gives a stronger contrast and separation, especially in the shadows. Finally, the LED sits somewhere between, more controlled than natural light, but still a bit softer than the flash. All 3 have their strengths, and I can see situations where I'd want to use each one. But what stood out most was how much flexibility the flash and LED provided, especially in lower light or when I really wanted to separate and isolate the subject from the background. Having control over that light made a huge difference. I don't think I've mastered the macro photography just yet, but I've definitely learned something valuable. When you can shape the light, you can create a narrative for your image. It's late morning now, and I've returned to King's Wood once more. It's the same forest, but with a new mission. This time, I'm not here to test lighting, I'm here to use it, to put what I've learnt into practice. The trees in this part of the woodland stand much taller, and the canopy blocks out so much more of the natural light. But what dappled sun does get through interacts and plays beautifully with the little pockets of bluebells sitting on the woodland floor. My goal is to try and find something new, something rare. I've been told that there are white bluebells in these woodlands, and it's my goal to try and find one today. White bluebells aren't their own species. They're actually a genetic mutation which stopped them from being able to produce the bluey purple pigment that give them their normal colour. They're rare, but they're definitely out here. Part of the beauty of photography like this is I'm in no rush. Along the way, I spotted this beautiful little fern. So I'm going to stop, take my time and photograph it, and we'll see just how it turns out. As I expected, the light levels in the canopy are much, much lower. The ISO I've had to ramp up to 1250, and I'm underexposing the background by about a stop. The wind comes in and out, and I'm waiting for a moment now to be able to illuminate it and get it hopefully perfectly still. And that looks like the perfect conditions. It didn't take me long to find my prized white bluebell. I found it here nestled between this tree and this fern, and it sits just down here, and I think I'll be able to frame this up to make a really nice composition. I framed it up and I've been able to reduce my ISO because the light levels here are a little bit higher. The problem I'm facing though is that it's on the end of a very long stem, which means that any little bit of breeze does cause it to move around quite a lot. I'm going to use the lighting panel to be able to just lift the foreground subject, and I need to be very careful to make sure that I don't blow the subject out. So I've just got to wait patiently now for the right moment, for the wind to settle, to be able to take the shot. I've only been out here for a few hours, but already I can feel a complete difference in the way that I'm working compared to running around frenetically trying to take advantage of those few minutes of beautiful light at either sunrise or sunset as a typical landscape photographer. This ability to take my time, slow down and find interesting compositions really is an enjoyable new way of working. I spotted this pretty cool little cone. Now, I don't know if somebody put this here, but this is a pretty obscure path. But I don't know. But I found it like this, and I'm going to photograph it. It's got dappled light that's falling on it, so I'm going to experiment because it's not moving as a subject, and I'm going to try both lighting it and using the natural light. So I've framed up a composition that I really like. The problem I've got is that the light keeps just bouncing onto the subject, off the subject, and it makes it very difficult to be able to get a clean exposure. So what I've decided to do is use my lighting panel and use this in two ways. The first thing I'm going to do is use it to block the natural light, so we stop all of that flickering effect, and then we're going to use it to illuminate and fill our subject. Now, I've had to put this to f5.6 to be able to get enough depth of field, and I'm really quite happy with that, so I'm going to go ahead and take that image and let's see how it looks. So after being lost in my own little world for the last couple of hours, I've decided to pack up and head home for a late lunch. But I really have been taken by just how much I've been able to use artificial light to sculpt and shape the subjects that I've wanted to photograph this morning. It's early morning on day 2 of my macro challenge, and I've come down to a new location, Marden Meadows. The meadows in May are incredibly rich, and I'm expecting to find wild orchids in bloom. These will make a perfect subject, delicate, colourful, and well suited to this lighting style. The aim of today is to see if we can take advantage of a cheap lighting umbrella, ordinarily used with flash photography, but my idea is to see if we can take the sun, which is already very, very strong in the sky, and diffuse this through the umbrella to soften out our subjects, lift up the shadows, bring down those harsh highlights, and basically give us a more pleasing image, but by using the power of the sun. My intention now is to just wander through this field, taking advantage of the beautiful conditions and sharing with you what I find. So I've already found my first subject. It's this beautiful little wild orchid which is sat by the side of the path. And what makes this so good is that I haven't got to trample into the meadow and cause any disturbance in order to be able to photograph it. I think it's going to make a perfect subject this morning. So I framed up my first composition and I'm already really happy with the results of this. I'm able to shoot at my base ISO, which is great. I've got a shutter speed of 1/250th and I'm shooting at f4 for that shallow depth of field. Nothing's going to change. We're still going to use our 50 steps of bracketing. But what I have got here is, you can see it's slightly overexposed. Highlights and the shadows create a little bit more contrast, which is what we would expect because the sun's coming in from over here. Look, you can see my hand as it just affects the image. So if I now take this cheap umbrella and I place it here, we can see that I've diffused the light now and it softens out that image much, much more. And it's as simple as that. And I couldn't ask for better conditions. There's not a jot of wind, so I'm just going to go ahead and take my 50 images for stacking. sun coming in from over here. You can see where I can affect the light, and again, just going to use this just to diffuse. And we're so fortunate that there's not a drop of wind. So look at this for my next composition. I've got the umbrella stood behind me, and actually the sun's getting quite strong now, so I might start using this for myself. But I'm using it, as you can see, just to soften out that light. I'm underexposing by 1/3 of a stop because I'm really mindful that I want to make sure that these delicate white petals do not get blown out in my final image. So I'm going to go ahead and take that. And again, the wind hasn't picked up yet. This is a perfect example of a morning to come out and shoot when the conditions are like this. Really fortunate today. So my big takeaway from today is that if we use the right tool at the right time, we can do macro photography all day, and that makes it a compelling subject to continue working at. This weekend taught me more than just technique. I learned how each tool, whether it's flash, an LED panel, or just a cheap umbrella, can really help solve specific lighting problems. At Kingswood, it was about working with that low filtered light under a dense canopy, finding that rare white bluebell and giving it the definition it deserved. In Meadows, it was about managing that open sun to protect the fragile subjects of the orchids. And across both sessions, the big takeaway was the more you can shape the light, the more control you have over the mood and the story you're trying to tell. I feel like I've mastered the fundamentals, the tools, the techniques, and the workflow, but now it's about building on the foundation, getting outside more often and experimenting, trying to improve with every shot. It's about learning what works, staying curious, and paying attention to what doesn't. Great macro images don't come from the technical know-how. They come from the repetition, from patience, and from building an understanding of how to see the small stuff. I'm already looking forward to the summer and chasing insects on warm mornings, and then later in the autumn, the mushrooms in the damp woods. Each season brings new challenges and new opportunities for me to experiment. If you've tried any of these lighting styles or have a favourite approach of your own, please do let me know by dropping a comment down below. I'd love to hear how you tackle these small scenes. And if you've enjoyed the idea of watching me tackle varied photography subjects, hit subscribe. There's a lot more ground to cover and a lot more for me to learn.